Welcome, everybody. My name is Kim Boekelheide, and I'm co-chair of the Emerging Science for Environmental Health Committee, along with Melissa Perry, who's sitting here in the front. So I welcome you all, those of you who are here in person, and also those who are present on the webinar. We had over 400 people sign up for the webinar. So those of you who are presenting, keep that in mind. There's cameras on you and there's a microphone, and part of the purpose of that is to have clear messages go out to our participants who are on the web. So we're here for a 1.5-day workshop, the title of which is Advances in Causal Understanding for Human Health Risk-Based Decision-Making. This workshop is the result of committee work of our committee, and the committee is a standing committee that will examine, explore, and consider issues on the use of emerging science for environmental health decisions. We are charged in facilitating communication about scientific advances that affect environmental human health. And our sponsor is the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. So there have been a number of workshops, usually 2 or 3 a year, that have been supported by NIEHS over the last 5+ years. There's a list of those on the screen for you to see. These have been by design at the cutting edge of science, trying to bring in what we know about the basic science as it pertains to environmental health decision-making. So the exposome, systems biology risk assessment, big data, climate change, et cetera. There was a committee that has worked for the last 3 months or so to organize this workshop. I was a participant in that committee along with 4 others, Wei-Shui Chu, Gary Ginsberg, Christy Pullen-Fedenik, and Reza Razapur. And this committee worked really quite hard to articulate what this workshop was intended to impart and explore. And I will speak to some of the details of our work in a minute. What I'd also like to highlight is the staff here at the National Academies, particularly Andrea Hodgson, and a big hand for Andrea, please. She kept our group going, organized and on point, and really did a tremendous amount of work. We also had a lot of other help from Annika Sin, Marilee Shelton Davenport, Keegan Sawyer, Arani Acosti, Tony Greenleaf, and Darlene Gross. And we have so many people involved because there have been some pregnancies and people going in and out of the support role. So a couple disclaimers before I get to some very high-level overview comments. So this is a public workshop, and its goal is to discuss and exchange data and ideas. So we invite active participation and contributions, but these are statements that you are making, and they are being recorded and also broadcast, so be aware of that. These are our individual opinions, and the summary of this discussion will actually be published. So as I say, there's an audience here, but there's also a much larger audience partaking in the workshop nationally through a webinar. And the slides that you show and what you say will become available broadly. So I'd like to make also a special disclaimer about our session for tomorrow. So we have constructed tomorrow morning to be around a debate topic with pro and con sides on some of the controversial elements of what is involved in making causal inferences. So you should be aware when you hear people take stands tomorrow morning that this doesn't necessarily represent their own personal opinions. This is for the purpose of discussion and setting up an interesting and hopefully exciting conversation that identifies elements of causal frameworks that are actually critical for us to do more work in. So the goal, at least in part, of tomorrow's debate session, and we have a couple scenarios, or 3 scenarios, that have been arranged to bring out some of these points of controversy, is to identify areas for future work and future advancement of the science that are needed, and highlighting those. So now I'm going to give you some very high-level view of what this workshop is about. This black box here is meant to represent the black box of the effect causal inference framework interpretive setting that leads from an exposure or exposures to a determination of whether that effect is plausibly causal or plausibly not causal. So our workshop is really focused on what's inside of this black box. So I'd like to share with you, just as, to start some of your thinking about what is meant by this black box, share some of the thoughts from the committee that developed the workshop. And so we actually record those calls. I requested the recordings of those calls, listened to about 25 minutes of it during one part that I knew was particularly thoughtful commentary of what are we trying to do. And so I'm going to read to you some of those thoughts that came out in that discussion. So this is from the call and the discussions of the committee. Causality is not a simple toxicology high-dose animal experiment result. At high-dose exposure to X chemical, that may be a sole cause, but at low dose, it may just be a contributing cause. The multi-causal framework is not just chemical agent in the environment. So we want to include the totality of exposures that can influence human biology. Social science aspects, stress, genomic and epigenomic vulnerabilities, the influence of economics, racial discrimination, and their impacts on biology, the embodiment of various life experiences. Social determinants need to be an input into causal frameworks. We have to be thinking about this. We don't want to relegate this to the sidelines. This workshop is the place to start thinking about how to include these effects. Causality is like a court of law. Does X cause Y? This is really difficult. But what we're actually seeking here is an understanding of, is X a contributor to the outcome? How do our efforts add to a causal inference workshop and not a variability workshop? And then finally, the bottom line, how do contributing causes and multi-causality get quantified and worked into causal inference frameworks and risk assessment? That is what we are trying to do over the next day and a half. So I'm going to take a number of slides here, and hopefully not too much time, to try to give some perspective about what the components within this black box are. And then the workshop is going to fill this out, I hope, in a much more elegant way than I am able to do over the next 5 minutes or so. So the components really fall into 4 areas: biology-based inputs into this causal effect inference framework, iterations of the data streams, synthesizing these data streams and the complexity of that synthesis, and then taking a probabilistic approach to these data streams. So what do we mean by biology-based? We're talking about, in a multi-causal framework, taking all of the kinds of data that we can acquire and including it into our causal inference framework. We're going to have multiple data streams, high throughput data streams, different kinds of model organisms, population information, AOPs, other kinds of inference frameworks, high throughput collections of data, molecular inputs. All of these are pertinent and relevant to our ultimate understanding of the biology behind the effect, causal relationship, outcome paradigm. This is complicated, multifactorial relationship. Iterative, because of all of these data streams, nothing is linear. It needs to be informing all the other data streams, interacting with those, and we're going to need to be doing this process multiple times to get closer to an understanding of what the cause-effect relationship is and what the frameworks are that allow us to interpret those inputs. So this is a nice color wheel just to emphasize there's going to be lots of information coming in. The goal of the causal inference framework is really to synthesize the complexity of all these data inputs. So in complexity means many interactions and details, and this diagram here, this is taken from other inputs, and Eric Berlow in particular, and an ecologist and network theorist has a great TED talk on complexity. But one of the things to realize about complexity is it's only complex when you have lots of information. When you only have one data stream coming in, it's rather simple, and we've been in that place. We've been with the Red Book. We've been with the toxicology paradigm of causal inference for many years, and we've become quite comfortable with it. And it's relatively simple in that the goal is really to identify one number for the purposes of risk assessment. But what happens is when we start to have many more inputs, things become quite complicated until we actually understand how to handle all of those data streams and have them interact in a productive way. And then the prediction would be that when we know something about those interactions and can integrate them and iterate on them appropriately, we'll have a working system that is relatively simple again. And probabilistic, meaning that our goal is not one number anymore. Our goal is to understand the likelihood of causality being associated with an exposure, given all of the inputs that we understand are imparting their meaning into the interpretation. So probabilistic is the future, and it's going to be our understanding of causality is going to be framed in the likelihood statement. So we're going from, this is the requisite cartoon that you all know. We're going from a background of risk assessment that really was historically quite linear and quite simple, elaborated on by mode of action mechanism, and now we're going to a much more, I think, interesting, interactive, iterative environment where there are lots of different inputs. So I'd like to summarize. So if you can't see that slide, it says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2, and step 2 is then a miracle occurs. So this is the work of the workshop that is coming up over the next day and a half, is to make this miracle happen so that we all can understand how a multi-causal framework is going to help us with the complexity that we face. So then my last slide of this overview is an attempt to integrate all of these ideas. We are looking for the lens. So this is our black box labeled with the lens that allows us to focus all of the data streams, all of the inputs that are important in understanding causality. And that lens is really our multi-causal framework that includes all of the biologic inputs and incorporates all of our understandings of contributing causes that are complicated contributing causes and realistic contributing causes for exposures for humans. And the outcome is going to be our understanding of what the probability is of a causal relationship between one of the inputs and that outcome. All right, so that's our charge. That's what we're headed towards. We're going to get there by having 3 sessions today, and then the session that I mentioned, highlighting gaps and opportunities with a debate format tomorrow. So session 1 is focused on laying out the groundwork of what has been done and what is currently understood about causality, and we'll have talks through the morning on in this area. Session 2 is case studies focused on current approaches to determining causality. And session 3 is exploring novel research tools that can contribute to our future understanding and future growth in understanding in this area. And then there's going to be panels that are associated with some of these sessions where the topics that are raised in the presentations are then further discussed and hopefully explored in greater depth. Session 4, again, is the debate format, and we have 3 debate topics with a pro and a con, and various members of our working group to participate in raising and highlighting the elements of hopeful controversy that we want to explore here. So we're starting out this morning with an overview, and we have 3 speakers, and just for the speakers, we're going to keep you to time. So we have somebody sitting here who's going to put up a card that says you have 5 minutes, and put up another card that says you have 1 minute, and then I'm going to stand up. So we want to keep you going through the morning so that we can all keep on time, so those on the webinar know what the schedule is and can tune in when they need to. We're going to start out with Jonathan Samet, USC Institute for Global Health, again, with an overview. Please.